Welcome back to Nick Learns Thai. I'm Nick. This is going to be another vlog style video where I'm going to talk through my thought process around the ALG Comprehensible Thai learning process and whether I should switch to using this process of this method entirely in my learning. So let me just do a little share here. Okay, so I'll start off just by explaining what the ALG, the Automatic Language Growth, ALG, slash Comprehensible Thai method is. They're not actually the exact same thing. Comprehensible Thai is the name of the YouTube channel, which most people are probably familiar with. That's how they would have come across this method. And the ALG, or the Automatic Language Growth, is the name of the method that sort of inspired the YouTube channel. Yeah. So basically, it's an immersion-based method. It's got this silent period in it. So they recommend don't try to speak at all. So it's all about sort of getting input, and the speaking will it will come naturally sort of much later. They sort of suggest after around 700 to 800 hours of input time, you'll sort of be able to start speaking, but you shouldn't try and force it before then. And the sort of input they're talking about is lots and lots of spoken and visual input at a slowly increasing levels of difficulty. And in terms of that increasing levels, the input needs to be comprehensible at around 80% or more understanding levels. So I guess you shouldn't increase the difficulty level if you can't get that 80%. Maybe you have to go back or stay at the current level until you can get that 80% before you move up to a harder level. The input is entirely in Thai with very minimal English explanation help or translation. And the objective really is to get to native level content as quickly as possible and then start consuming the native content instead of the kind of the learner content, which is what's found in the Comprehensible Thai YouTube channel. And there's also this claim that it's sort of the best or perhaps even the only method to get native-like pronunciation, although there seems to be some disagreement around that from learners, which I can go into more. Now, I'll put a note here, see Dreaming Spanish Roadmap and who's the Mike's reports. So the roadmap here that I'm talking about from the Streaming Spanish website, so that's obviously about Spanish, but it's a website, a YouTube channel, and a course that sort of takes this method and applies it to Spanish. And I've got this really cool timeline type thing here. And then the other person I mentioned here, who's the Mike, is someone who's it's the handle of someone on Reddit who's been using this method for Thai. And he's got some really in-depth reports over time of many, many hundreds of hours of using the method. So I'll put links to all of this in the description. You can check out to get more information. But looking at this timeline here, you can sort of see what I was saying above there about this sort of silent period. So all of this period in here is, no conversation is recommended. And they say, conversational is optional starting after around 600 hours. This is for Spanish. And then it's sort of recommended after around 1,000 hours. Now they do say, and I have seen in other places, that if this is for Spanish, and if it was going to be for Thai, the recommendation is to double the number of hours that I've got listed here. So I've got 0, 50, 150, 100, 300. So that would be sort of 600, 1,200, 2,000, 3,000 in terms of the number of hours of input. Now, if I want to try and relate this to my own level and my own experience, just sort of reading these descriptions down here, I think my current level is probably around sort of the middle of this intermediate, or maybe a little bit lower, somewhere around here. Although I don't really know what my vocabulary level is exactly. That's kind of something that I'm working on at the moment to try and quantify that and sort of work on knowing my vocabulary level, as I'm doing my learning. So I'm not quite sure if I'm quite as high as 3,000. It might be closer to 2000 or so, or 1500 or something, not sure. But in terms of like, the abilities here, that's kind of approximately where I am, I guess. And just to explain this thing down here of crosstalk, so that's not the same as conversation. Crosstalk basically means that you're having a common conversation, but you're speaking in your native language. So in my case, that would be English, and the other person is speaking in their native language, which is meant to be my target language. So if it was me, I'd be talking to the Thai person. They're speaking only in Thai, and I'm speaking only in English, and we're talking back and forth, cross language like that. So you're still getting the input in Thai, and it's still a conversation, but you're not trying to speak Thai until much later, like I mentioned. Okay, I think that kind of explains that. Now, I just want to give you like a brief history of the method, just in case you were confused, because there's sort of different elements that come in here. And I'm not an expert, but this is what I've put together from a bit of research. So a lot of people may have heard of this guy, Stephen Krashen, and he has this comprehensible input sort of theory. Actually, there's like 5 hypotheses. And comprehensible input is just one of them, but it's the one that's kind of the most well known. Anyway, he got together with this other guy, Tracy Terrell, and in sort of the early 1980s, they published this approach, a book or something, I'm not sure exactly, called The Natural Approach, which kind of was about this immersion method of having a lot of input at the right level, and that being the primary learning method. Then there was this guy, J. Marvin Brown, who had been teaching in Bangkok, trying to teach Thai, he may have been involved in teaching English as well, I believe, and also learning Thai himself. And he was sort of influenced by reading this natural approach, and he came up with kind of his own version of that approach called the Automatic Language Growth Method, so ALG. And then he went back to Thailand. When he came up with that, he was somewhere else, I think maybe Japan. He went back to Thailand and he was started teaching at the AUA language school and overseeing the ALG Thai course there, which was the start of that method as a course, I think, in sort of the mid-80s. Now, fast forward to, around this time. So the guy who came up with the Dreaming Spanish course, Pablo, he actually went to the AUALG Thai course, sometime, more in the 2000s, I assume. And he did a bunch of the Thai there, and he found it a really good method, and he wanted to take that back and apply it to Spanish, which I believe is his native language, in teaching Spanish, and that's how this came about, and that's become really, really popular. Lots of people seem to be getting value and success with his version of the ALG method for teaching Spanish, and that was sort of started around 2017, it looks like. Also, we've got the Comprehensible Thai YouTube channel, so that's the other one I mentioned that a lot of people might be familiar with, and how they may have discovered this idea, this method. And that was sort of started in the early 2020s, I believe. It was influenced by the ALG method, influenced by Krashen and the comprehensible input idea, and sort of that started that. I looked at sort of, it wasn't started like strictly with ALG methods. If you read kind of the creator's description of how it was started, it was a little bit more a sort of messy start. But after they'd sort of got on their feet and they started getting some content out there, they kind of refined the channel to be more strictly kind of ALG method. And at some point after, I think around 6 months after the channel started, they started to get teachers from the AUA school to come and do content for the YouTube channel. And I believe that sort of corresponded around with COVID as well. So perhaps AUA closed their courses because of COVID, and that meant a lot of the teachers were out of work. So a lot of the teachers, if you've watched this YouTube channel, you would be familiar with, say, Crew Ying and Crew Fa, and there's many others. So those teachers from that school came and started to contribute to the Comprehensible Thai YouTube channel. That's how you got to have so much content over time. So that channel is completely free, and it's sort of a non-profit endeavor. And they've got hundreds and hundreds of videos there which you can go check out. And then these teachers also have their own channels and stuff as well. You can check out as well. But anyway, that's a brief history of the method and how it sort of brings us to this YouTube channel, which is kind of how most people would perhaps know about it, and also the most accessible way of getting this sort of content and starting to consume it is through this free YouTube channel. And then, of course, the other related channels that have kind of sprung up around it. Now, next, what I want to talk about is what I like about the method. So, for a start, it's like super simple and sort of minimal time wasting. What do I mean by that? It's you just have to consume the content. The content's there in terms of this YouTube channel, and you don't have to waste time with trying to find resources, coming up with your own resources, messing around with reading about different methods and finding the best method. The method's already kind of there. It's super simple. There's not a lot of extra thought that needs to go into it. And if you want to do some learning, all you have to do is rock up at the YouTube channel, turn it on, and just start watching. And so it's minimal sort of messing around time. So I think that's really attractive about it. It's driven by interest and curiosity in theory. So the idea being that you're meant to enjoy the content that you're consuming. Of course, at the early stages, the more beginner content, and when you have, very little understanding level, that's going to be quite difficult. And it's, necessarily going to be quite slow and, slowly building. And it's going to be very repetitive and stuff at the beginning. So, in theory, it's driven by interest and curiosity. In practice, particularly at the beginning, it's harder to do that. And also, there's never going to be probably a perfect resources. So I mentioned that YouTube channel, and I'll come back to that in a second. But the teachers there are trying to apply the method, but it doesn't mean that they've done it perfectly well, or even maybe it's perfect for, or it's great for one set of learners, but some other set of learners, find it lacking in some respect, and perhaps based on the topics that have been covered or whatever, it's not motivating for them. The other thing is it's kind of new and exciting. I mean, it's not new really, obviously. Like I said in that history, it's been around since the mid-'80s, but I think with YouTube and the rise of YouTube and getting that sort of content onto YouTube, that's the kind of the new element. And that's perhaps made it more accessible now than it was before, whereas before it was only in classes, so you'd have to sort of be there in person to get it. But now it's on YouTube and it's all of a sudden it's accessible. But it's sort of challenging the status quo as well, which it does kind of appeal to me a little bit. And you only have to step into Reddit, into both the Learning Thai community and the language learning communities to see this bizarre, almost bizarre, fierce rivalry between the ALG / comprehensible input people and the other kind of language learning people. Like I said, it is kind of a little bit bizarre. It's sort of, kind of cultish, or like, these arguments that go back and forth, for days about which is the best method. And, some of that does actually appeal to me. I do kind of like to, challenge the status quo. And going back to that Who's the Mike character, like I said, he's done these really in-depth reports of his progress over the many hundreds of hours that he's done. I can definitely imagine if I had come across this method, when I first started, that could have been me, or I could have been someone. I could have been doing something similar where I was trying to document the method and really sticking to it over time. But, alas, I didn't even know about this method when I first started. So, I'm coming at it after several years of relearning, I'm now coming up to it now and wondering whether I should switch from what I'm doing now to doing this comprehensible Thai method. Now, the answer there, I mean, I had a long think about it and I've had a bit of a try with it, and I've decided that I'm not going to switch into doing pure ALG, pure comprehensible Thai learning. Now, my reasoning for that, as I said just now, I'm already several years into learning with other methods, so it's kind of too late to do that silent period thing at the beginning where you don't try to speak for, 1,000 hours or 800 hours or whatever it was. So that's kind of one reason. I've tried on several occasions to watch the Comprehensible Thai YouTube channel content, and I've repeatedly found it difficult to avoid being distracted. Now, that's probably, I mean, I can try to spin that and say that it's, the type of person that can watch that is, I don't know, they like watching boring content, maybe it's one way to put it. But it's probably more speaks to my, maybe I think it speaks to sort of modern ways of watching TV where you kind of grab your phone and you're doing stuff on your phone while you're kind of watching in the background, which you can do in English like relatively easily. You can kind of follow along with what's going on without losing the plot while you're also doing stuff on your phone or doing other stuff that you're doing other tasks. But obviously that can't really work when you need to focus and focus on the content of what's going on. So I think that tendency and that kind of that habit of being distracted by other things has negatively affected my ability to really focus on that YouTube content and get the most out of it. And yeah, I just repeatedly found that my mind would just wander to other things. I'd become distracted, pick up my phone or whatever. And I did try different methods. I did sort of try it while I was exercising, watching, for example, so I couldn't grab my phone if I was on an exercise bike or whatever. But I was happy to know that it's not just me that feels this way. I've seen other people comment with similar sort of comments on Reddit, and also there's a guy who's got a YouTube channel called Thai Learning Lifestyle, and he's recently done a video where he kind of reviews his experience of watching. I can't remember if it was 50 or 100 hours of comprehensible Thai YouTube content, and sort of gives his review of it so far. And he's starting from a kind of beginner level. So I can link to his video in the description as well if you want to hear more about his experience. Another point here is other methods seem to be more scientifically supported. I do like to follow the science generally in most things. So that's kind of one reason. I mean, doesn't mean that it's not that it doesn't follow. Well, how do I put this? It doesn't mean that this method doesn't work. It just means that it hasn't been studied scientifically. So I don't think there's been studies that proved it doesn't work, or studies that on it that didn't show efficacy. It's just that it hasn't been studied. Maybe because it's quite difficult to study, I think. So, but other methods do have evidence for them scientifically. So I'm kind of more drawn to those methods. And I'm currently using other methods and I'm enjoying those. I seem to be getting results with those, and I'm kind of interested in exploring them further. So those are my reasons there for not wanting to switch. Although note here that I will be incorporating the YouTube content into my learning. I mean, it's a huge amount of native content that's free. It would just be crazy not to try and incorporate that. You also might wonder, what I'm going to be doing instead. I'll come back up to here, to this kind of map here. I'll drag this other element in. So I didn't really mention extensive reading, but extensive reading is something also that Stephen Krashen advocates for. There seems to be a ton of research on it, on extensive reading, and that's something I have been doing more recently. So definitely extensive reading. And as part of that as well, this four strands method, which was invented by Paul Nation, He's a sort of language learning expert from a New Zealand university, and he published this kind of method in around 2014. That's the method I've been using recently. It includes input in it, both reading and listening, but it also includes output, as you go, and it includes practicing things you've learned over time. I'll have another video where I go into more detail about this method and how I'm using it for my Thai. But that is kind of what I'm focusing on at the moment. Now, a few final thoughts. As I mentioned, there's this fierce debate in Reddit and other places about, about this comprehensible and ALG methodology and what's the best method. There's a lot of people, trying to argue about what's the best or the most efficient method. And I think we can argue about that sort of stuff all day. But on an individual basis, we're all different, and I think we should seek a method that works for us. Let's not, waste too much time arguing about it. And the method that works best is likely to be a method that we enjoy and a method that we can stick to for the long term. So try different methods, try on different ideas, and find one that works for you, and that can be your method. Okay, well, I hope that has been interesting for everybody. If you're in a similar position, you're trying to decide kind of what method to use or whether to switch into the ALG/Comprehensible Thai method, then I hope this video has been useful. Please give it a like, leave a comment if you've got anything to say, and please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks very much.